And away we go. All right, so welcome to this week's Unschooling Café, where we're going to talk about the idea of becoming more unschooly, which is probably not a word in the dictionary, so don't look it up. I wanted to talk about this topic because it's something that comes up often, and I feel like I've had a lot of clients recently who've been saying, like, we're homeschooling, but it's not working to be so structured or so teacher-led. We'd really love to be more unschooly, but we're concerned about having to meet our government obligations. We're concerned about making sure that our kids learn what they need to learn. So my goal today is to talk about this notion of being more unschooly, what it might look like in different contexts, and then to address some of the but what ifs that come with asking ourselves that question of how to be more unschooly. I'm going to share a link straight away, just because I have it ready to go in the chat and I don't want to lose it. So one of the things I will be mentioning is Derry Henham's 20% proposal. So there's a link to that. And I also do want to let you know that the Unschooling Cafes have a whole bunch of helpful links associated with them. Namely, there's a YouTube channel where all of this is recorded and shared. There's a newsletter sign up if you'd like to know what upcoming topics are. If you have a suggestion for a topic, then please let me know either with a direct email or by filling out the form. And of course, the Unschooling Facebook group is where a lot of great conversations happen as well. All right, so let's go ahead with this topic. So I decided to address it from three perspectives: the perspective of the homeschool parent, the school parent, i.e. a parent whose child is in school, and a teacher as well, because I think there's a lot of teachers who are in the system and there are parts of how they're doing their work or being asked to do their work that bother them, that don't feel quite right. So I want to make sure that we have a chance to touch on those as well. I've been in each of these situations personally. My work now is connecting with families who need help to navigate their child's education in one way or another. But I have been a homeschool parent. My 21-year-old homeschooled for most of his school years. And my now 18-year-old was out of school up until grade 4. I've been a school parent with her. And I've also been a teacher in the system. So I'm familiar with all of this from these many different contexts. All right, so as a homeschool parent, if you're finding yourself wanting to be more unschooly, the first thing that I would invite you to do is to understand any legal obligations that you have. And often people feel like that's the end of it. Well, I can't be an unschooler because my state or my province or my country requires me to follow the curriculum. So I would invite you to go beyond that. And a helpful way of doing that is to talk to local unschoolers and find out, people who've been at this for a while, who have these obligations, but also are unschooling or feel that they are mostly unschooling. How do they do it? So that's a really important point. Ask local unschoolers. Because once you start having those conversations, it can really open up your ways of thinking about meeting the obligations. So for example, if the obligations are that your child learns to read or that your child is able to do multiplication, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go and teach your child that. What it might mean to you is that you're just going to notice when your child starts asking about multiplying or being open to playing a multiplication game, and then you record that. You might record it in a way that looks as if you taught it intentionally, but the end result is the same. The child has still learned or has an interest in multiplication. So I think that's a really important subtlety, that a requirement from an outside body does not require that you pre-plan and teach something necessarily. It might just be that you've got those things in your head or you've got a list of them. And when it happens anyway, you note it down. And it's not intuitively what we think it means to have legal obligations, but it is the same thing because it is the child doing whatever that is. And then if you do realize that you're getting towards the end of the year and there's some obligatory things that haven't come up, then you might say, hey, let's just sit down and we're going to take a little bit of time to go through some of these topics. And again, then you can choose to go through it in the way that makes sense for your family. So it's just to kind of get out of that sense of being obliged and being controlled, but rather how do we rise up and meet this obligation in a way that honors our needs and our choices as a family. You may certainly still have to make compromises, but usually not as much as we assume is the case. So once you've gotten beyond the legal obligation and all of that kind of mindset, and for those of you who are lucky enough not to have any government-specific oversight in how you homeschool or how you educate outside of school, one of the things that could be interesting is this 20% idea. So I've mentioned it in the chat. I gave the link to Derry Hannum's work about that. So his proposal is that in a school context, and it can also be in a homeschool context, it happens in some workplace contexts, that 20% of the time become free time. It's not curriculum oriented. There's no obligations around that. It's simply time that is time to pursue your own projects. They're not marked, they're not anything, it's just that time. As a homeschool parent, that's a little bit less obvious, perhaps, because it's not the school day of 9 to 3. But if you are homeschooling in a way that you feel there's a start time and an end time, that might be something to consider is, well, what happens if we just say 20% or 30% or 50% of our schooly time is actually just completely free time. Another thing that I think is important in a homeschool or in a schooling or learning outside of school context is the idea that structure does not have to equal schoolwork. So I think what often happens is we feel that we need some kind of structure or rhythm or routine in our lives, and we do. We're creatures of rhythm. We sleep, we wake up, we eat, goes out the other end. Like our bodies are built that way. It is human to need some kind of rhythm or routine or structure, however that kind of works for you. But having a structure as a family whose kids don't go to school doesn't mean that you have to do math, do English, do science, do. It might just mean that you wake up and after everybody wakes up, you read together because that's something that everybody enjoys doing and it's a good way to start the day together. Or maybe you wake up and you flood outside because your kids wake up with tons of energy. Or maybe it's the opposite and they wake up needing time alone. That's structure. And that kind of structure or routine or rhythm can help all of that learning that we typically think about with homeschooling to happen. Because if you're meeting your kids' needs for what's the in and out, what's the feel of the day, then they're much more able to be in touch with what they're choosing to do and what they want to do. And you might start to realize, oh, I don't actually have to oblige them to read, because when we just have this like gentle time in the morning, they choose to go and read. Cool. And so that's the way it can be sort of shifting some of that. Another interesting thing, it's such a simple thing and it's such a hard thing, is the idea of asking questions that you don't know the answer to. So as a homeschool parent, I think we sort of take on this, okay, we're responsible for our kids' education, we're the teacher, we have this role. And it's a great feeling of responsibility and we want to do it well, of course. And that can lead to constantly seeking teachable moments. I remember being taught that phrase when I was a student teacher. And I think teachable moments, and just to actually clarify what they are, it means that I remember actually being given an example when I visited a Montessori school. They said, if you see a child drop a pencil, teach them how to pick it up with the correct pencil grip. That's a teachable moment. If you see that a child is asking about, what letter is that? Instead of just answering, you might go on to say, oh, it's the letter A, and A makes the sound ah, but it can also make the sound A, and it's the first. we take that moment and we go instead of simply answering the question or simply being in the moment. So teachable moments, I think, can lead us to be very schooly, or we can step back and say, oh, what if in those moments I just offer to pick up the pencil, or I just answer the question? And a parallel to that is this idea of just asking questions. So sometimes ask your child, what do you think about this? And it's not because you have a preconceived answer or you're thinking, okay, we have to do a little bit more history and we just went to the museum, so I'm going to ask some questions and then I'm going to be able to write that down. It's just coming from an honest place of seeing them as a person who has opinions and thoughts and truly asking, what do you think about this? And the power of asking your child that, of them starting to understand that you see them, and you're interested in what they have to say about something, not because you want to see if they know the right answer or because you think there is a right answer, but you're truly interested. That allows them to be so fully human, which is where this notion of being able to do what you want to do and being able to learn what you want to learn and being able to be you, that's one of the places it comes from. You know, when kids are constantly asked questions, but there's a right or a wrong answer, or they're asked questions and it's in a test, there's no point in having your own opinion because it doesn't matter. So those little moments are like transformative moments. You can still, be asking questions that have right or wrong answers and tests and all that. But if there's also those moments where you truly want to know, what do you think about this? The power of that is huge. Going along that is the idea of being curious as well. So it's asking them questions, but it's also being curious about who they are and what they think. And that might just be when you're about to step in, what if you step back instead? And that can be a hard thing because as parents, we want to make sure they're okay. We want to help them learn. We want to. But sometimes stepping back might be the thing that allows them to grow in a beautiful way at that moment. And then connected to all of this is the idea, again, to release them into being themselves by accepting that they might not always be interested in something that you think they should be interested in, or you want them to be interested in, or that they might not agree with you. And that's another huge one. And I find that hard even with my 21-year-old. I was just talking to him this morning. I was like, and I was saying, but I think this would be really good. I could caught myself. He's 21, but I still love him and I still see this. And so it's to say, to share, to be human, to share, but then to accept. And it's harder to do that with our kids. But the more we can do that, the more we show them, I see you. And when they feel seen, then they can step into themselves. And that's when you suddenly realize, oh, I'm not schooling anymore. We are experiencing, and that's becoming an education for this child. So those are my thoughts on homeschool parent that I sort of prepared for this. I'm going to talk also about a school parent or a teacher, and then I'll open it up to discussion. So if you're a parent of a child who is in school, then a lot of what I said applies. All of the ideas about asking questions you don't know the answer to and being curious is all very relevant, but there's some other things that are specific to this situation. And I think the biggest one is to remember that this is your child and your family. You have chosen to have your child attend school. And of course, you need to respect the school and how they do things. But it is still your child and your family, and your child is still themselves. Which is important, I believe, because it means that it's okay to question what's coming from the school. It's okay to say, I wouldn't mind if they had 10 minutes of homework 3 times a week, but an hour of homework every day is not working for us. What can we do? Just opening up that questioning is really huge. And it's the same thing, I think, if you have oversight from the government about your homeschool obligations. It's okay to say, we are us, and this is the obligation. How are we engaging with it? Is there flexibility if we need to look for it? So that flexibility can sometimes exist within school. It's not obvious. School is 5 days a week from 9 till 3. But there's nothing probably to stop you from saying, well, for us, school is 4 days a week. We're not going to go on Mondays. And I can see the eyes. It depends on the situation, how you do that. Some people are able to just let the school know, hey, we won't be there on Mondays. Others, that would be a really major problem, and they can't do it that way. They might need to just know for themselves that there's a day off most weeks. In some places, you need to start being aware of what your attendance, how many days of absence you've accumulated, and be aware of that kind of thing. But it's that idea that going to school every day unless you're sick does not have to be a given. It's okay to say, how's it feeling? It's 5 days a week working. Right now it's not. Okay, so what can we do with that? It's okay to be thinking and asking those questions. It's okay to go travel for a month or go camp for a month and come back. And if you're doing stuff like this and your child is somebody who's feeling like, I don't think we're supposed to do this. If your child is feeling anxiety around that, that's also really important, right? Because you're seeing your child. If your child is feeling it's not okay for me to be here with this flexibility, honor that. And sometimes it's a question of finding another family who feels similarly and just making that connection. And I know for my daughter, she had a friend who would also take days off. And the two of them knowing that they would sometimes take a day off together and spend that day together was very different than my daughter just taking a day off. So it can be a little thing like that that can shift it in a way that works. One example that we had was tests. Sometimes we can be in a situation where our kids are missing a lot of school and they might wind up missing a lot of tests. And when they go back to school, first thing that is talked about is how are you going to make up all the tests? And then that can become overwhelming and lead to missing more school. And so we learned at a certain point to ask the question, okay, there's all of these tests. Which ones can we drop? And it was often a question of the teacher would say, well, yeah, no problem. We can just drop one, which was like an inconceivable concept. You mean you could just like not do a test? So there's flexibility there, and it becomes sometimes it's a question of saying, well, what if the other tests were weighted differently? Is there a way that you can allow this child to get back into the groove of being in school because they've been out for a week without them suddenly having to perform on all these tests? It's the little things like that that have that like unschooly mindset, i.e. what honors this child's needs? How can we find flexibility? Because ultimately it's all about the child. And remembering there's a child and there's a system, and the system can make adjustments, but it might not realize that it's necessary or that it's possible in that moment. Another thing, if you are a parent of a child who's in school, is to just be aware of how you talk about school with your child. Do you help your child to feel that they still own their learning, or is it all them doing what they're being asked to do at school? And again, that can come back to questions. If something comes up in a curriculum, I know right now there's a lot of questions and a lot of shifting happening about how history is taught in Canada because of the Truth and Reconciliation process. So if your child is being taught history at school and you've talked at home about how these things are playing out, then it's okay to ask your child, well, how do you feel about the way this is being presented at school? Does that thing that's in the textbook make sense to you? So just inviting them to not accept everything in their school as black and white can really help them to see themselves as a person, to recognize that there are shades of gray. And then the ultimate, perhaps ending to that idea of reflecting on how you talk about school with your child is, how does it feel to actually have the idea that school is a choice as part of your family's way of thinking? You know, and that's a big one, right? Because for most families whose kids go to school, they just go to school. Like, it's just what you do, you go to school. And to say, it's even just to say, oh, like some people homeschool, some people go to school, just to introduce that idea can help your child experience school differently, to feel that they still are themselves, even if they're not gelling with what's going on at school, because some people choose not to go to school, and that's okay. But it can feel very dangerous for parents who need their kids to stay in school to say things like that, because what if they then start to want to homeschool? Well, it's something to consider, but it's not necessarily easy. Also reflect on the role that homework plays for your child and family. Are they coming home super stressed and you're not able to have any connection time in the evening because of homework? If so, is there a way that that can change? Is it possible to talk to the teacher? Are there other kids who might be in the same situation? These are all questions and things that it's okay to ask. Remembering, I think, that if you choose to go to school, you're choosing to step into that system. And you can't expect the system to 100% change for you. Like there's a dance, right? If you choose to be there, then to a certain extent, to a large extent, that's your choice and you can't change it all. But you are still you, your child is still your child, and it's okay to initiate conversations about flexibilities that are needed. We've also talked in the Unschooling School team about the idea of a responsible subversive. Is there somebody in the school, like if things aren't going well for your child and you need to find flexibilities, who's the person in the school that you might be able to talk to? Who's the one that you can tell they get it? They're able to think differently. That person is potentially going to be a life changer for your child. And sometimes, with an older child, you might not want to be too involved in that relationship. If that person feels like a lifeline and a safe place for your child at school, is there a way you can support that in the background without becoming a part of that relationship? But just know that in any school, there are people who can engage with you in a way that you might not be feeling like the system at large is engaging with you. And those people can make a big difference. So yeah, who does your child connect with? And when they've got that feeling of connection and safety in the school, sometimes that allows them to feel better and better experience the rest of their schooling, because that connection, that place of safety, is so important. Okay, and then for people who are teachers, who are looking for more, who wish they could give their students more flexibility, more space, more time, more, less obligation. I think one of the things that teachers realize instinctively, but perhaps haven't said to themselves, is the answer to this question. What state do students have to be in order to be able to direct their learning and to explore their interests and passions? And I think that's a very important question for homeschooling families as well. What state does a child have to be in? And we can answer it for ourselves. Like, what kind of state of mind, state of spirit, state of whatever do you need to be in order to be able to fully be yourself, to direct your learning, to attend to your responsibilities? What has to be going on underneath for you? And then think about, okay, for my kid, what do they need? And sometimes it's things around introversion and extroversion. It's things like physical activity or not, basic things, like very fundamental things like that. But it can also be the more subtle things. So take some time to think about that for your child, or as a teacher, for your students, for your classroom. And sometimes just having um, that thought can allow a teacher to shift something that can make a huge difference. So is it that, instead of every single day being filled with the same schedule, is it that we open up the time within the school day so that it's less scheduled? Or maybe there's a day where there's no schedule, and that's what Derry gets into with his 20%, which I'm just realizing actually not everybody saw. Hang on, I'll repost that again in a moment. That idea of, can you take 20% of time to just be open? I think also for teachers, recognizing that you're in a system, and in that system you're the teacher, they're the student. It's the same thing with homeschooling families, right? We can think like we're the parent, they're the child. We have the responsibility and the leadership. Teacher has that responsibility and that obligation. But how can you bring it like this? How can you create more horizontal person-to-person communication? And it comes back to what I said earlier about asking questions that don't have right or wrong answers, being curious, seeing those people. One of the other things I do is I lead a children's choir, and during the pandemic, we switched to Zoom rehearsals, which was interesting. But one of the things I realized was the best thing about choir, especially in those early months of the pandemic for the kids, was connection. I mean, that we sang was great, but it was the connection with community. And so what I started doing was inviting 2 or 3 to come early every time, and we would have tea together. It was called Tea with Stephanie. So they just enter the Zoom meeting, 20 minutes early. Their parents would provide them with some herbal tea or hot chocolate or whatever it was. And we would just chat. And those chats made such a difference to the dynamic of our choir rehearsal, because all of a sudden, everybody knew a little bit more about who we were as humans. And that's the kind of thing that a teacher may be able to create in a school context. Some teachers will open up their classroom at lunchtime. And if the students feel welcome to come in, that then becomes that Tea with Stephanie moment of a true connection. So any time that you can create a human-to-human experience that is not in the teacher-to-student dynamic, fantastic. One way of doing that, which a friend of mine she's retired now, but she taught for many years, she told me that she could tell the difference in her relationship with her students the day after the first report card went home. Because she was teaching in an alternative school and she didn't have to do much in the way of marking of tests and things, and she really didn't want to do anything. So up until that first report card, the students didn't have any sense of her as being a judge or an evaluator of them. But as soon as that first report card went home, they realized, oh, like she's evaluating, she's commenting on me. And she said the difference in the dynamic was huge, and she hated it every year because there was nothing she could do about it. But that it was really, really marked, as it were. So I think as a teacher, one of the things you can do is delay any marking whatsoever as long as possible. Give as many days, weeks, months together without that I am judging you piece. And then your relationship comes much stronger. And it's the same thing in a homeschooling situation. If you might be choosing to do tests with your child for whatever reason, but the more you can delay those or make them very, very specific and very not part of your overall experience of learning together, the more you're allowing that human-to-human connection, which is what then gives rise to this freedom and this unschool type of feeling. Don't mark everything. In schools now, I see a lot of talk about passion projects, which is wonderful that students are getting time to work on something that they're passionate about. But there's that ever-present rubric of how they're going to be marked. Well, what if it was a passion project that wasn't marked? That there was space for the passion project to be playing with Lego without a product. There was space for the passion project to be looking out the window or reading a book. that's a true passion project, which allows that individual to feel themselves as valid and valued in that space. Here's another one, which I've been thinking about a lot lately, is, so often you go into a school and you'll see signs on the walls, beautifully made signs that say, always do your best. And I've been reflecting on how hard it is to always do your best. What if you don't want to do your best that day? Or what if there's a couple of things that you have to do, and one of them is really interesting to you, and the other one just isn't? What if we were starting to converse with kids in ways that allowed them to say, I want to do my best on this because I think it's super cool. This thing that doesn't really interest me, like I'll get it done, but I'm not going to do my best on it. And what if we could even say, it's okay to get a 60% on something like that because it's not your thing. You don't care about it. And go for the 90s on the things that you love. What if that notion could somehow be a part of learning, that it's okay to know what you love and to let it be, and to give your energy to those things, because that's certainly what we do as adults. We choose the things that we don't want to do. Okay, they talked about the chatting. Last small thing, and this is also for homeschooling parents, the languaging around, would you like me to? Would you like me to help you with this? Would you like me to see if I can find this for you? And let the answer, no thanks, be an accepted answer. That's another small one, which can also make a big difference. Meet students when they're at where they're at in any of this. So if you're trying to introduce a little bit more unschooliness, a little bit more flexibility, less marking, recognize that for some students, that is going to introduce a lot of anxiety because they're used to everything being marked. They're used to being told if it's right or wrong, if it's good or not yet good. If that's the case, that's okay. Start from there. And subtly and gently introduce ways of thinking that allow them to step forward more and start to have their own feelings about those things. But don't suddenly pull the rug out from under them, because that's really tough. If you're used to your validation coming externally, it takes a while for it to start coming from the inside. Okay, so without that being a particular ending, those are the notes that I had, and I'm realizing I've spoken for way longer than I normally have, so I'm going to stop talking and invite you to weigh in on any of that. And thank you, Sydney. Sydney's putting the a couple of links into the chat. The first is for Derry's talk, his writing about the 20%. And Carl Rust is another member of the Unschooling School team, and his book is Get Out of the Way to Let Kids Learn, which is fantastic. And he's also been writing recently about an experience he had of going into a school as a supply teacher and really looking at ways to open up what was happening in the classroom. So I'm curious to hear how some of this resonated for you. I believe that many of you, I know a lot of you are homeschooling parents, so feel free to focus on that side of it as well.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. I'm really, really happy I tuned in today. It validates a lot of what's going on inside me, but I wasn't really, I guess I needed this type of affirmation. I am homeschooling my daughter, and recently we started thinking of maybe signing up to school. And that's because she started gravitating towards watching more and more YouTube channels. And her initial interest is actually right behind you. Her initial interest is horses, and this is an amazing painting. And I actually took a picture to show her that. I hope it's okay with you.
Yes, the artist is actually a co-renter in the building that I rent my office space in, and she has all kinds of smaller versions of her work as well. So I can, if you email me, I can put you in touch with her directly.
Okay, thanks. So yes, my daughter's riding horses, playing with horses, model horses, and painting horses, and does everything. And so she would watch a lot of videos on YouTube about horses and about raising everything has to do with horses. And YouTube is like a hose, a fire hose, right? It starts suggesting all kinds of stuff to you, and then suddenly, the horses turns into something else, and then into something else, and then to something else, and then content is for less young audiences. And she became really like 2 hours a day watching. And then, at some point I'm looking at what she's watching it, and I was so devastated, and I started blaming myself, not like allowing this, and how did I let it happen, and really, and having to use my force and remove YouTube from the iPad at all. And I'm using my power, which I usually don't like to do. But this is like taking a drug from an addict. Like, you have to use your power. Otherwise, it would just, there's no understanding here or discussion or stuff like that. Anyway, um, and so we were talking about this, and we thought, well, maybe we'll go to school. We, as in my husband and I, maybe we'll send our daughter to school. There's an art school in Montreal. She loves art, and maybe it would be a good place for her. There is part of me that doesn't believe that. But I don't really know how to stand there and be a leader for her if we continue homeschooling, and allow her natural interest flourish without getting sucked into um, inappropriate subjects. So this would be my main question. I know it might be off topic of everything you spoke, but I just I don't know, I just started talking.
I think it's totally on topic. I'm really glad you asked it, because it's, the more that we step back, the more that our kids start to make their own choices. And of course, in this world of YouTube and Snapchat and all of that, that's going to be a choice for many of them. The first thing I would say is that I think that's something that each family has to decide on, whether their child is in school or not. And in some ways, being in school, I think, can lead to kids wanting to spend more time on social media and YouTube, because that's what many of the conversations are focused around. So it's not, I think that having them in school isn't necessarily going to have a reducing the amount of time they would want to spend in that impact. That would be one thought. But I think with everything that I've said today, to me, holding all of that is the fact that we live in family units, and in order for us to live well together, we have to have a way of living well together. You know, if your kids are jumping up and down on the table and throwing food every mealtime, that's probably not a way that you can live well together. So you're going to figure out a way to change it. And it might be you as the authority, like if whatever word you want to use, like it might simply be saying, that's not okay. You can't do that. Or whatever languaging comes to you in your family. But as parents, you know, when our kids are first born, we make decisions for them, and we make decisions for the well-being of our family. And that's something that shifts and ebbs and flows over the years until they're 18 and 21 and they leave home. But so whether it's YouTube or how they eat or whatever it is, you may still need to make decisions for them. Or depending on their age, you may be making decisions with them. You may be doing something like saying, there's 2 hours of time a day for screen stuff. We're setting it up so that, because I think, isn't there a kids YouTube? There's something, does anybody know? I feel like there's something that, you know, there's various limits that we can.
Not in Quebec. Not in Quebec. Not in Quebec.
I don't even know what to say. I live in Quebec as well, so let's find a solution to that. There's got to be one. So whatever, you know, I wonder if there's a way of limiting what comes up in her YouTube recommendations, even in Quebec, so that there's still that sense of, you know, this is available to you. You can choose how you engage with it. But because we live in a family, and, you know, for our family, if you spend 12 hours a day on the screen, that doesn't work. So you're spending 2 hours a day on the screen, and it's your choice how you engage within that. So sometimes it's like, you don't have to have full control or full authority. It's stepping back and saying, okay, what are all the needs here? And I think one of the things that can sometimes come up as well is kids will see the parents spending a lot of time on Facebook or, you know, whatever it is. And that might then become more of a family decision of saying, like, wow, we noticed that as a family, when everybody's off on their screens, we're really not very nice to each other. So we're all going to commit to, or, you know, however you say it, like, I'm going to commit to not being on my screen after 6 p.m. And I'd like, you know, does that work for you as well? And it's how much of it is a collaborative conversation, how much of it is this is just the way it is. Depends somewhat on age, the personality of the child. One thing that is really interesting to look up, I'll just put it in the chat, is sociocracy. Did I spell it right? Yes. So, you know, looking at consent and consensus, and, you know, how to make some of those decisions. Sociocracies can be practiced in any kind of a context, including a family context. There's a person called Hope Wilder who writes a lot about sociocracy for children in a school context. But again, reading her stuff would be very interesting. So that's kind of where I went on that. Did I address your question enough, Taya? Did that?
Yeah, I thank you. I would say what I'm missing is how to stand as a leader for her that would lead towards more, I won't say educational, but other interests than the temptations that she finds on YouTube. She's, by the way, she's going to turn 9. So
Okay. All right. So, Sydney, I see your hand, and I'll just share my ideas quickly on that, and then I'll pass it over to others to respond as well. I think that the idea of being a leader, it comes back to, again, what do we do as a family? So, you know, as a family, we go and watch horse shows, or we go and ride horses or whatever it is. So leading the way by creating opportunities to go and do things that aren't just screen, but in parallel to that, recognizing that sometimes the best way to change something that's feeling that it's not healthy for your child isn't to address the thing itself, it's to build something different. It's like, instead of, if you imagine you've got two campfires, the more you say, like, this is bad for you, you shouldn't do this, you're adding fuel to that fire. It's getting really big. If you just quietly start feeding another fire, it's the fire of, oh, so-and-so's coming around to play, or we're going camping, or we're going to the store, or even if it's like, oh, I have to go to the store now and I can't wait till the other parent gets home, so you have to come with me. Like, even if it's sometimes things like that. But again, with all of that, recognizing that there's a part of it where even at 9 years old, they will get not bored, but at a certain point, they will start to engage differently with that screen. They will start to see, oh, like, I was looking at horses and now I'm looking at I don't know what. And they'll start to realize it, which I personally wouldn't let a 9-year-old just go. I mean, I totally relate to what you're saying, but I've also seen it time and time again with kids of many ages, that they will start to to pull themselves back. So like a multi-pronged approach. And I think Peter Gray is interesting to read on this. Judy Arnall speaks about it as well. There's, it's reading, it's the kind of thing, looking up online, just like, how do you manage unschooling and screens? There's lots of people who have written and shared their approaches to it. But those are some initial thoughts anyway to hang your hat on. You're welcome. Sydney. Did you still, oh, you're muted again.
Spam calling, had to quiet them. Two quick things. I tend to agree with you, Stephanie, that I don't think school tends to relieve that problem of obsessive screen time. In fact, I think it tends to exacerbate it. In my experience, kids who go to school feel like the only place they have control is on the screen. And so that's where they tend to spend more time out of school than not. So I just think school is not going to stop that. The other thing is that I'm a firm believer in the go deep to go broad philosophy, where somebody has a specific interest, like horses, for instance, that the deeper they go, the broader they get, because of all the different connections that get made in the life of being into horses, whether it's measuring feed, or finding out who the best teachers are, or going to horse shows, or what. I just feel like she probably at 9 years old would have much more fun hanging out with real horses than watching horses on YouTube. And the more that you can support that specific connection in real life instead of on the tube, I think gives her more of a chance to expand that into other directions and be sort of more on the ground.
And I think that it's also an interesting thing that those passions can lead kids into volunteering, which can lead them into all kinds of amazing stuff as well. That's the beauty of this like unschooling approach, whether your child is in school or even if you're a teacher in a class. Like, if there's an interest, how can they help? Because speaking from personal experience, horseback riding lessons are really expensive. Horses are really expensive. But when your kid can go and help out at the barn, and as somebody who's not in school, they have so much flexibility to do that during the day. And maybe there's somewhere that you can actually go and drop them off for the day, and they actually are engaging in meaningful help. So sometimes those are the kinds of things. But I would caution as well that, going back to the idea of where you put your energy, like sometimes if a child is interested in something and they start to feel that the parent is like, okay, you're interested in horses, okay, so we're going to find you a volunteer, the child can get overwhelmed and it can actually smush that interest. So when something is truly coming from your kid, make sure you don't start owning any parts of it. Make sure they retain ownership, which is going back to that idea of, would you like me to help or would you like me to fill in the blank? And if they say no, that's okay. Then you go like this. If you have to tape your mouth shut, then no matter how much you think that what your suggestion was a good idea. And it's amazing how often they come back 3 days later and say, actually, could you? But we're human. We like to know that what we do comes from us. I think that's a pretty wide and natural human.
I realize that teachable moment instruction can be abbreviated as TMI, but there's another meaning of that TMI, which is too much information. So
that's brilliant.
You got to figure out whether or not they consent to getting any more information when it's a teachable moment.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful one. Others, there's some stuff. Oh, playlist for learning times. Yep. Yeah, and so that's the interesting thing about having learning times, right? Like if it's a learning time, it's like, okay, you got to sit down, blah, 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 then it's one flavor. And if it's a learning time where it's like, this is just a time that is protected. Like, I'm not going to make you go to the grocery store with me in this time. We're not going to have a play date in this time. I'm available in this time, but I'm not necessarily going to sit down at the table with you. I'm just available. And then what are some things you might do during this time? It's a very different flavor than it's time for math. You might also have it's time for math. And that's like, I'm such a strong believer in start where you're at, like meet yourself and meet your kid where you're at. If your child is resisting anything to do with school and learning, then maybe even a learning time once a week is going to be too much for now. But if your child and you are absolutely used to homeschooling being 9 to 3, 5 days a week, then to suddenly change all of that to a learning time would throw everybody into chaos. So recognize where you're at and think about like, what's one little shift? What's not working in that it's not feeling good or our family's not working well because of it, and what's one little shift? And big changes are a series of small little shifts. And sometimes a little shift creates a huge change and you didn't know it was going to happen. And then you realize, oh, all that effort I thought I was going to have to put in with this systematic change, it's just sorting itself out because I just changed one thing and it made all the difference in the world. Who knew? So yeah, starting with where you're at. Oh, and Bree just said she had to run to another call. Okay. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I do apologize for having spoken for so long today, but if you have anything else to share, then feel free to chime in with it now, any questions, or even just a thought about something that really resonated with you today.
I'll just say again, if no one else is taking the space, about dealing with authorities, with the Quebec authority for my case. I really realized that we're feeling much better in unschooling, and then to fulfill our obligations, I do take time before every obligation that I need to submit. And I tell my daughter, we have to go, we have to do now this, and that in order for us to continue do the homeschooling. And I found that she really engages with me, and she understands that. And we're doing what we need to present. We're presenting a very nice picture, and we get a lot of compliments. And I must say that if they knew what we really do at home, it's very different from what I present. But at least I present um, the things that we do in the light that they want to see it. And I'm happy I learned this, because it really it bothered me for a long time. So
I think that's huge, not just for parents, but for kids, because if a child looks around and sees all their peers in school, learning, doing homework, doing tests, it's really easy for that child to start thinking that they're not learning, that they're not getting an education, that they're being poorly served by their parent, depending on what, what's going on, or that they're failing, or there's so much negativity, like really detrimental negativity that can come in that kind of situation. So, one of the silver linings, I guess, of all this oversight that people experience in Quebec and in many of the states is that it does require you every now and then to sit down and go, okay, like, how does our life line up with what's happening in school? And it can be really helpful just to know, oh yeah, like, I'm doing this that's, the same as, or this is different, but it's still valuable. When my son was completely at home, and we did a little bit of like directed work, but a lot of it was very unschooly up until grade 7, and then he went to a Montessori school for a year, and they did the Canadian Test of Basic Skills within the first like 6 weeks of school, and he aced everything. Like, he scored at like grade 9, 10, and 12 level. And I mean, I was gobsmacked, because I didn't necessarily think that would be the case, just because his life was so not focused on academics. His teachers were just amazed, and it caused them to really think, well, we've got all these kids who've been sitting in school, and that's what we think they have to do, and yet your kid has been out like playing in the forest and just playing, and with the little bit that you did, he was able to do all of it. And that was a really important moment for him to see, because he was also able then to accept, okay, there are some areas that I'm not maybe academically as strong, or that I don't get how this like social pecking order of school works. Like, I don't get that. But he could see that there were other areas where he was much more comfortable and much more able than his school peer, his new friends or his new peers. So there's nothing wrong with having that moment of comparison. Or comparison's the wrong word. That moment of just saying, how do we express what we do in those terms of oversight? And I really, really, really encourage people not to think of it in any way as like cheating, or because it's easy to think, oh, like, you were, I don't know, playing outside, and we're going to express that as a science lesson. Like, it's easy to feel that you're doing wrong, but it's not doing wrong. Like, if your kid is playing outside and the spring melt, and they're noticing, like, you can see just the way they're playing, that they're observing how water moves, and you describe that as a science lesson, it's just looking at it through another lens. The child still has the learning, and perhaps probably has better learning, because it's coming from them. So it's so important to me that that's not cheating. It's just expressing it in a different way and seeing it in a different light. And I think, Tanya, that's what you're starting to experience, is like, we can be unschooling and meet the obligations, and everybody's happy. Great. May it long be possible to do it in that way. I think that's the key. And sorry, Jen just said, do any of the books or videos help the teen to see this viewpoint, so the negativity about not learning is diminished? There's, I don't know, Sydney, if you remember his name, there is the guy, and I think Jen, I might have said
Bowles
this.
is a good source of that.
Yes, Blake Bowles. And actually, Blake Bowles has worked a lot with teens and unschooling he runs trips for teens. There's one coming up to Berlin in the fall, and one of my clients is actually going on. It's like amazing opportunities that he offers. And he also speaks, and he has an online talk tonight called Alternative Paths to College. He's in the States, so he means, like, we would understand that as university. I just posted it on my Stephanie Soul Education page, so you can sign up for that there. And he speaks in a way that works for kids. And there's also an unschooler who's now 20 or so, and he's in the process of making a movie, and he's done a whole lot of unschool videos. And I can't remember his name.
I know you're talking about they're raising money to make a 8-part documentary. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. And then there's also Logan LaPlante, his TED Talk. Whoops, not his Ed Talk, but his TED Talk. And there's a site called, I have a link to it, which I can share in the YouTube comments. It's like Grown Unschoolers, I think it's called. Yeah, it's a really good question. But I think I would actually ask you a question back, Jen, and this would be for anybody, is where would your kids be likely to go and access these viewpoints? You know, so many will not read a book. You know what a video is that often really resonates is the I Sued the School System. It's by Prince EA. I've shown that to a lot of teens. I've also found that I as a teen mentor can show videos to teens that their parents can't show to them because it's a different context. So that's something as well. You know, is there somebody who can show them? It can be me if that's helpful. Yeah, but yeah, with that question, feel free to send me back information about how you think your teen would be willing, or your child would be willing, to take in that information. I need to get more familiar with Instagram and TikTok because I know a lot of it's on there. I just don't know anything about it. So if I can find any Instagram, TikTok references, then I'll add those to the YouTube comments on this as well. All right, I'm going to bring us to a close there. Ben and Genevieve, thank you.
Stephanie, before you do that,
yep,
I've got to say this. The phrase that's come up a lot today was this thing called government obligation. And I think it's really important that people look at that from both directions, which is, what is the obligation of the government to provide resources for you and your children to learn? It's not a one-way street. I presume in Quebec and in Canada, you pay taxes like we do here in the US. That means they work for you. They're there to provide you a service. You're not their slave that's supposed to do everything they tell you. And it's really important to feel empowered to take control of that process to get what you need out of education. You're already engaging them as contractors, so ask for what you want.
Hear, hear. And I will note that we, unfortunately here, and I know in other places as well, the end of the line for the government finding that a family does not appropriately educate their child is that the family will be reported to child services. So unfortunately, there is that fear element that is hanging over people's heads. I mean, it's extreme for it to get to that point, but there is a power differential.
And who do you report the school to if they fail to appropriately educate your child? That's the other question.
I think that's an amazing place to leave it. It's a really tricky one because, you know, I mean, I've had conversations with many of you, and I know that people have had, like, lots of people have situations where the school is not able to meet the needs of their child. And for that family to then turn around and be obliged to meet the needs of the government in a way that continues to not work for their child is really tough. But the positive note, even in Quebec, I do know of, like, I personally know 3 families that are not being required to meet any obligations right now because of psychiatric and psychologically supported mental health experiences that their kids are having. And the government has given them the space they need in order to heal. So it's not it's not cut and dry. Yeah. But it gets complicated when you get down to that point. And I do believe that everything we've talked about today around, being more unschooly, when we can think like that, and when we're seeing our kids as separate people, as whole people, when our kids feel seen, then we can step forward in all of this together. It really allows our kids to manage difficult situations more when they know that they are seen, at least at home, and they can start to step into the world in that way as well. All right. So I wish you a beautiful day and a wonderful week. And I hope spring is feeling sunny and great wherever you are. I know I saw my first little tulips coming out this morning. And I haven't yet decided on the topic for 2 weeks from now. And this particular topic was inspired by a conversation I had with one of you. So do please let me know if there's other topics that are in your mind as a potential one for us to look at in 2 weeks' time. All right, take very good care. And maybe I'll just put in all of those links one last time in case you want to open any of them up on your screen. And I'll see you around.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephanie.
My pleasure. Take care, everybody.